He likes to call them beautiful, but for Donald Trump, tariffs are more than just a descriptor. They're a powerful trademark of his thinking and a recurring theme in his speeches. Trump's fixation on tariffs has often seemed all-consuming, weaving through nearly every aspect of his economic rhetoric. He touts them as a means to protect manufacturing, generate government revenue, and pressure foreign nations that he believes have taken advantage of the United States for decades. To understand the depths of his obsession, one must first recognize how central tariffs have been to his worldview, especially in the last few years. He introduced a 25% tariff on all steel and aluminium imports around the globe, triggering fears of a global trade war. That move set off a cascade of retaliatory measures. Canada and the European Union both announced their own tariffs on American goods, worth tens of billions of dollars in rapid succession. Yet Trump refused to back off. Instead, he threatened to impose a draconian 200% tariff on alcohol from the EU unless what he labelled a nasty 50% tariff on whiskey was lifted immediately. Tariffs, at their core, are taxes on imported goods, and this particular weapon of choice quickly became the focal point of Trump's foreign policy. Economics textbooks note that the cost of such taxes usually passes on to importers who, in turn, may well raise prices for consumers. Indeed, some experts have warned that the American public would bear the burden of rising costs, but these concerns hardly deterred Trump. He had already imposed 25% tariffs on other goods from Mexico and Canada, exemptions notwithstanding, and placed a separate 20% levy on Chinese imports. Across his statements, a single phrase echoed. Other countries had been ripping off the United States for too long, and tariffs were the only straightforward fix. Trump consistently tied his resolve to the fact that the US historically applied lower tariffs than many other nations, a gap that he believed left the country exposed. Economists, however, warned that his policies would likely spark higher consumer prices around the globe. Even the US Federal Reserve cited trade tensions as a concern when it cut the 2025 economic growth projection from an earlier target of 2.1% down to 1.7%, while also raising the inflation forecast to 2.7%. Fed Chair Jerome Powell described the uncertainty as remarkably high, pointing specifically to the possibility that tariffs could ultimately slow the economy and elevate price pressures. Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick was more blunt. He insisted that tariffs were worth it even if they pushed the United States into a recession. The obsession with tariffs might not be so striking if Trump's approach were limited to one or two disputes, but instead it spanned the globe. China, Mexico, and Canada accounted for over 40% of US imports in 2024, making them obvious chief targets for the administration. His criticism extended to all three, claiming they did too little to halt illegal drugs like fentanyl or the movement of migrants. Those governments dismissed the accusations. Yet, by the 12th of March, Washington had pushed ahead with new duties. A 25% tariff on steel and aluminium took effect, prompting immediate retaliatory moves from Canada, which introduced a 25% tariff on an additional 29.8 billion Canadian dollars worth of US goods, which is about 20 billion in US dollars, starting on the 13th of March, including over 12 billion Canadian in steel items. Simultaneously, the EU unveiled its own tariff plan to strike at 28 billion US dollars worth of American products, everything from bourbon to motorbikes, slated to be fully in place by mid-April. Trump responded by threatening the 200% tariff on European wines, champagnes, and liquors, saying it would be great for the wine and champagne businesses in the US. In his mind, it was the perfect way to counter the EU's 50% tax on American whiskey. This standoff with Europe wasn't just about steel or alcohol, though. Trump repeatedly lamented the overall US-EU trade deficit of around $213 billion in 2024, describing it as an atrocity. He painted tariffs as the quickest path to restoring balance. Trade relations with Canada grew particularly combative, despite the two countries' normally close economic ties. Canada stands as America's largest supplier of both steel and aluminium, accounting for 60% of US aluminium imports. At one point, Trump threatened to double the steel and aluminium levy for Canada to 50%, citing Ontario's 25% surcharge on electricity sold to 3 states in the northern US. That threat was rescinded hours before going into effect, after Canada agreed to suspend its additional charges on energy. However, Ottawa's general 25% tariff on about $29.8 billion Canadian dollars worth of American imports remained, aimed at everything from cast iron products to computers. Even Canada's incoming Prime Minister, Mark Carney, sharply condemned Trump's unjustified tariffs, vowing that the country would stand firm. Elsewhere, Mexico felt the heat when US tariffs on Mexican goods, 25% on a broad range of products, plus an additional 10% on energy, took effect in early March, leading many to fear significant disruption in the North American automobile supply chain. Cars and car parts often cross multiple borders during manufacturing, so tariffs can upend cost structures. The Mexican president, Claudia Sheinbaum, denounced the tariffs, calling them unjust and promising swift retaliation. Yet soon after, Trump revealed exemptions if vehicles complied with existing free trade rules under the USMCA, diminishing some of the immediate damage. Still, suppliers eyed the next possible wave of taxes anxiously, uncertain whether negotiations might unravel again. No conversation about Trump's tariff obsession would be complete without mentioning China. Trump placed a 10% charge on all goods from the Asian giant in early February 2025, doubling it to 20% on the 4th of March. Beijing replied with new duties of 10 to 15% on US agricultural items, plus direct measures against aviation, defense, and technology companies. It also threatened to respond to the bitter end if Washington escalated further. Analysts warned that a prolonged clash could spur major supply chain reconfigurations. Indeed, by some estimates, exports subject to American tariffs topped $800 billion within a year, spooking global markets and fueling concerns that protracted tension might weaken worldwide growth. Yet Trump relished describing these battles as necessary for rebalancing decades of one-sided deals. He presented the metal tariffs as vital protection for US manufacturers, even though some 2.4% and 1.6% price increases on steel and aluminium were recorded after similar moves back in 2018. If the objective was simply to bring foreign producers to heel, it came at the cost of straining ties with traditional allies. The second time around, many governments swiftly matched his tariffs with their own, turning a single confrontation into multiple. As the conflict widened, auto executives in Detroit braced for potential spikes in component costs, particularly since roughly 40% of US steel imports came from 3 nations: Canada, Brazil, and Mexico. Farmers, meanwhile, feared for their export markets. When Canada targeted sports equipment, tin foil, or produce, or when China went after American soybeans, the shockwaves rippled through rural communities. Statistics told the story. The United States had a lower overall average tariff rate than most countries prior to Trump's moves, typically 2 or 3%. Under Trump, some goods jumped to 25%. Others, like alcohol from the EU, were threatened with 200%. This abrupt upsurge unnerved economists. The Federal Reserve, eyeing consumer sentiment and business investment, trimmed its growth expectations. Rate hikes paused as policymakers weighed the inflationary impact of new import taxes. By March 2025, the Fed openly acknowledged that uncertainty around the economic outlook has increased, directly tying it to the White House's tariff barrage. For Trump, however, everything pointed to a single premise. Tariffs were the perfect negotiating instrument. He believed that foreign countries rely on the American market more than the US needs theirs, and that imposing or threatening tariffs would bring them begging for deals. In his second term, he boasted about how these taxes were supposedly boosting federal revenue, even if critics noted the money ultimately came from domestic consumers. He also hinted that recessions were an acceptable trade-off if it meant securing new trade deals. In one particularly striking comment, Commerce Secretary Lutnick insisted the tariffs were worth it even if they triggered a downturn. The question then is, what truly drives Trump's fixation? One theory points to his business background. In real estate, he learned that aggressive stances can yield quick concessions. Another theory posits that it's all about domestic politics, playing to voters who blame global competition for job losses. Yet another theory underscores his worldview that every relationship is a contest of winners and losers, with tariffs representing a powerful lever. Whether accurate or not, the consistent theme is that for Trump, tariffs double as a rallying cry and a blunt instrument. Trump's willingness to layer tariffs onto virtually any policy disagreement reinforces that idea. Border security? Threaten tariffs against Mexico. Energy surcharges in Ontario. Raise duties on Canadian steel. European taxes on US whiskey. Hit back at their champagne. Such moves generate headlines, sow uncertainty, and arguably corner the other side. But in turn, they also spook investors. Stock markets turned volatile whenever or expansions were announced, with companies grappling to guess the next flashpoint. Despite repeated alarms from business groups, Trump stayed the course. Many world leaders scrambled for solutions. Some hammered out temporary exemptions, as Canada and Mexico once did with earlier steel and aluminium duties. Others, like the EU, imposed focused retaliation on iconic American industries in politically sensitive US regions, hoping to build domestic pressure. Whether these tactics worked is debatable. Trump hardly budged. Instead, he told supporters these retaliations showed how worried his rivals were. Indeed, the escalation cycle continued almost unabated. In the meantime, the US soared above its historic tariff levels, unraveling decades of liberalizing trade policy. Even so, Trump framed each new round as a triumph, claiming factories would return and that the trade deficit would shrink. At rallies, he declared that if countries insisted on keeping higher tariffs on American goods, the US would match them dollar for dollar, sometimes brandishing tweets vowing reciprocal taxes on trillions in imports. For him, that unwavering posture signaled resolve and intimidation, two traits he believed indispensable in modern geopolitics. That is why the word tariff surfaces so relentlessly in his speeches and tweets. It encapsulates his combative style and his overriding conviction that when you push, others fold. Though the waves of data 25% steel tariffs, 29.8 billion Canadian dollars in Canadian counter tariffs, $26 billion in EU duties, repeated showdowns with China. One truth emerges. Trump sees tariffs as a universal remedy, a policy sledgehammer that can crack open any tough negotiation. Economists remain skeptical. Farmers and manufacturers brace for retaliation, and the Federal Reserve worries about the toll on growth. But for Trump, none of that overrides the simple notion that tariffs equal power. As long as that mindset prevails, America's trade partners will keep bracing for the next hammer blow. If you like this video, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe for more deep dives into the world of politics and global economics. And don't forget to leave your thoughts in the comments below. We love hearing from you.